Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Naomi Skwarna, a journalist and actor who makes her feature debut in Dim the Fluorescents, which is having its second ever public screening tonight, that's Tuesday, January 24th, at the Slamdance Film Festival at 6 p.m. And yes, that movie's director Daniel Worth was my guest on our last episode. This should give you an idea of how much I liked Dim the Fluorescents. Naomi picked Margaret, the film Kenneth Lonergan made after his acclaimed first feature You Can Count on Me, or tried to make anyway. Shot in 2005 but unreleased until 2011, and only then in a version that doesn't fully reflect the filmmaker's intentions, Lonergan's movie stars Anna Paquin as Lisa Cohen, a high school student in Manhattan whose involvement in a horrific accident sends her spinning off her axis. But there's much, much more to the story than one person's trauma, as there always is in Lonergan's work. And we get into all of it, including You Can Count on Me and Manchester by the Sea, which is why this episode runs an hour and a half, which is still half the length of the extended cut of Margaret, which is not the director's cut. We'll get to that. This is someone else's movie.
I wasn't really sure why to pick a movie exactly, but I guess I have long been a fan of Kenneth Lonergan, and particularly this movie, and now that it feels like people are like, oh, who's this Kenneth Lonergan guy with Manchester by the Sea?
Yeah.
It seemed somewhat relevant.
When did you first see it, and which version did you see?
Oh, okay. Well, oddly, I watched it on Netflix, of all places. It was like, I had really wanted to see it, and I've been like tracking its progress for some time, and I think I probably saw it like just very shortly after it was released. But yes, on Netflix, and it was not his cut.
Right, I'm guessing the 2.5-hour version.
Yeah. And then maybe like last summer, I'd seen it once and I thought it was astonishing. I loved it. I was amazed by it. And then I was going to write something about Manchester by the Sea, so I thought this is a good excuse to like watch You Can Count on Me and Margaret again, and this time I watched his version, and I was so happy I did that, because there are so many, besides just like the lengthening of certain scenes and stuff, there are a few really important moments that are just not present in the shorter version.
Yeah. I was really struck by... two things feel radically different. One is that the aesthetic feels so much messier, and yes. I think part of that is because the longer cut is unfinished. I mean, it feels like a work print. I'm sure it's not. I'm sure every choice is deliberate, but the sound mix, the intrusion of noise, just the generally grubbier feeling of Manhattan, and part of that, of course, is because the film can't be released on Blu-ray apparently in the longer cut because it isn't conformed, it isn't finished. What we're seeing is a standard definition edit on the DVD. So it looks a little shabbier. And the other thing is just how much more breathing there is, just how much more almost every scene is different. And if it's simply a question of the sound mix being radically different, or the music being different, or the scenes not finishing or jumping over things in the theatrical cut that they don't do here because it just unfolds at a different pace and has more room for everything, and a couple of massive revelations.
Yes, which you kind of just have to take on face value when they've been sort of deleted in the shorter version.
Yeah, hopefully people listening to this will have seen at least one cut, but it's
yes, it's true. I actually really have no idea how seen it is as a film.
It is sort of potentially obscure enough that people don't know that this is the one that happened between You Can Count on Me and Manchester by the Sea, which is weird because there is such a continuity between those three features.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And feel free to talk about whatever, we don't have to keep it to Margaret. There's plenty of room to move.
Isn't it funny? I always feel vaguely embarrassed to call it Margaret.
I'm physically doing it. I'm physically.
You're like, that's what it's called, but like, but people don't know why. So I almost, I sometimes like, I go back and forth. I call it Margaret around people who've seen it, and Margaret around those who I suspect haven't.
Yeah, and even that is weirdly self-defeating.
Sure.
As a decision on this part, it's like, well, the character's name is Lisa. What? You just everything about it fights easy understanding, even though it is really simple to describe to people. I mean, it's about a young woman, a girl, who is completely unprepared for life. Like, that's how I was describing it. And that's part of it, but there's so much else going on. There's her entire struggle with culpability, or even if her brain will allow her to understand what culpability is, there's all of the basic stuff that happens in the course of that. There's potential for romance, or at least understanding and attraction and compassion. She's not ready for anything that happens, but she's supremely confident that she is. And so you spend either 2.5 hours or 3 hours and 8 minutes watching this person just be completely. It's like watching a I don't even know what the appropriate term is. It's like watching a stuffed animal get thrown around in a whirlwind. She has absolutely no armor. She's just bouncing back and forth, and all she has is the illusion that she knows what she's doing.
But she's so adventurous as a character. She's so consenting to things that you almost feel like and she is a very as a teenager, which is what she is. She's like, she has like a hunger for a certain kind of like self-destruction, because she's still building a myth about herself, which is something that I find really fascinating about the film. Like, my favorite scene, which again, probably, maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but I'm absolutely obsessed with the scene between Anna Paquin, who plays Lisa, and Emily, who is played by Jeannie Berlin. Yeah. The scene where Lisa calls her strident. Do you know the scene I'm talking about? Yeah. And it's this amazing argument between an incredibly mature older woman and a really intelligent but really immature younger woman, who both are very powerful and like each other a lot. Yeah. But she, Emily says this thing to her about, you're free to falsify your own life, but don't falsify mine and my friends. And it feels like I don't actually know why I brought this up exactly, but except for, just talking about Lisa as this kind of stuffed animal, sort of, she's maybe a stuffed, I would push back.
Too cute. I think
there's a stuffed animal doesn't like, she's a catalyst for all these things. She doesn't cause the accident, but she distracts the driver who, you could say caused the accident, right. or
yeah, she's not the foot on the accelerator.
Exactly. But she is understanding the level of her, the power that she has, at like beyond just like men, which is something that happens in the film in a few different ways, but also just, having to do with life and death. And this, as a lot of people like to remark, that this film is very post 9/11. Very
much so. I mean, and not just because you're constantly reminded of how recent it was, because everybody looks like a baby. I mean, not just Paquin, but Matt Damon, who looks fetal in a couple of shots.
Yes, he's flubby, really young.
Unformed version.
Even just the city looks different, and the clothes that people are wearing, very, very early mid 2000s.
Yeah, looking back now, that film was shot 11 years ago, which is inconceivable to me.
And he started writing it, so like, I don't know if he started like, I'm forgetting now. I feel like there was that Rebecca Mead New Yorker profile of Lonergan that was recently published. I think he talked about, starting to work on it very soon after September 11th, and like walking around the city and listening to people's conversations and transcribing them, and like that scene in his cut of in the diner where there's just like that very slow zoom and you can't hear what Lisa and
is it David?
I think his name is like Darren?
Yeah, John Gallagher
Jr., yeah.
Who barely figures in the theatrical cut and has so much more of a life in this one.
I know, and he's such a fantastic actor, and
and in 2005, nobody even knew who he was, which is, again, like just Lonergan's amazing instinct for casting.
Well, okay, here's a super embarrassing thing, which is the reason why... the reason why I was like, oh, I can't wait to see this movie, Margaret. I had seen You Can Count on Me a long time ago, and I liked it, but I don't think I really had an awareness of like and I'd read This Is Our Youth, because I'm a theater nerd. I knew it was an important play, and but at like some point in the early 2000s, I was super into this musical called Spring Awakening.
Oh yeah.
Which John Gallagher Jr. became known for because he originated one of the roles and he won a Tony Award. And that was in probably about 2005. And I remember like, Googling him every so often, being like, what's he up to? And he was in a movie called Pieces of April, which is also a good independent film.
I think that was the first time I was aware of him. I didn't really appreciate him, I think, until Short Term 12, but that was years later.
Yeah. And then he was on The Newsroom. It's funny, he keeps kind of getting breaks, and then the breaks sort of dissolve. Yeah. Not because of him.
But yeah, the story of the effort to release this film is as detailed and complex and convoluted as the film itself, which is just fascinating. And more often than not, when you hear about an alternate cut of a movie or a lost film, it's something that gets lost because one person cared really passionately and then somebody else didn't, and so the finances never got put together. Or it's something like Don's Plum, where Leonardo DiCaprio and Tobey Maguire make a movie for the fun of it, and then it gets disappeared through history because they don't want to have it out there in the world, and it's pretty terrible. But this is... I was rereading all of it just the other day to make sure I was caught up on it before we could talk about it, and it is insane. There is another cut of the film out there somewhere that no one... Well, there are two, in fact.
The even longer version?
Shorter ones. That's the thing. I thought there was a longer version.
He has a version that's even longer.
How
and he's
long
like...
is it? Is he talking about it now?
Well, it was in that Rebecca Mead piece. I mean, I think he just sounds like someone who probably... I've said this to Daniel, who's also... Daniel and Miles, who wrote Dim the Fluorescents. They're both big Lonergan fans. And Margaret is something that they actually, like, sort of referenced in some discreet ways in the film. Not that matters, but we were talking about how... I mean, speaking for myself and him, too. I don't know about you.
Okay.
I almost feel like I could keep watching Margaret forever. It could just keep going.
Yeah,
and
I'm in.
Integrating new characters, but just that lens, his wisdom, the wisdom that he has, and the generosity and the darkness of his darkness is not punishing, though. I find he's not sadistic, even though he does kind of... There is a lot of... He does dwell in psychic pain.
Yeah.
A lot.
I think he has to, though. I mean, that's clearly what attracts him, right? Like heaping tragedy on people to see how they behave and see what happens.
Exactly,
afterwards.
to see how they behave, not necessarily to like make them become stronger or but almost just to like make them more interesting. Mm-hmm. And they are. Like Lisa is such an interesting character within the sort of the chaos that ensues after that bus accident.
Yeah. It's been fascinating running back and reading other people's responses too, because there's a stream of part of it is that the longer cut was saved by the Team Margaret hashtag that resulted in 2011 in some critical support and some ultimate grudging support from Fox Searchlight to send out DVDs. I mean, this is the thing that I cannot believe. The guy who made You Can Count on Me makes a movie for Fox Searchlight, and after all the legal wrangling is resolved, Fox Searchlight chooses to dump it. They dumped it. I mean, they released it on 2 screens in America in October, or late September, early October, because the producer, Gary Gilbert, torpedoed a possible screening at TIFF that year.
Oh.
Yeah, this is in that big New York Times Magazine piece from 2011 or 12.
Yeah.
that details the
I didn't know that it got bumped from TIFF.
It never got submitted because he refused to sign off. That was the Scorsese cut that was going to be submitted. So for those of you listening who don't know about all this stuff, I'll try to keep it as quick as possible. Lonergan was contractually obligated to deliver a cut that was 2.5 hours long to Fox Searchlight. Same kind of rule that kept The Abyss from being too long in 1989. Contractual obligation is that you get final cut if you deliver it to a certain running time. And without that, you lose final cut and it can be taken away from you. So the nature of the production of Margaret meant that the producer, Gary Gilbert, who put up most of the money, or guaranteed most of the money for the shoot, meant that he had also the ability to sign off on something, or that he also possessed the ability to sign off on the final cut, which meant that he didn't like the 2.5 hour version and proceeded to simply obstruct further editions, further iterations of the film. He gave it to the editor of Brokeback Mountain, and a 2-hour cut was created that no one has seen. Lonergan hates it and refuses to acknowledge it. It exists, but no one has seen it. Searchlight said no, because they were bound to Lonergan because he managed to bring in a cut that was 2.5 hours long. Then, around 2009, I think, Martin Scorsese stepped in to cut it himself and try to figure out a cut that would work. The 3-hour, 8-minute version that's on the DVD, I believe, is the assembly cut or the final pre-cut cut that Lonergan came up with. The music, the opera music, is temp tracks that they kept in this cut, which makes me think that that's where he stopped. That was the version he got it down to before he started cutting what would be the 2.5 hour version. Scorsese's cut comes back is 2 hours and 40 minutes long. So it's almost certainly distilled from the extended cut from the 3 hour 8-minute version. And whatever else is different about that is enough that they feel confident about submitting it to TIFF. Searchlight's ready to do it. Gary Gilbert says no. So it doesn't go to TIFF. Fox Searchlight finally just says, they settled with him, or he settled with that. No, they settled with him in 2011. The film is released, dumped onto those 2 screens, gets a meager release in Canada. I know it played Toronto. I think it also played Vancouver. 1 screen, 1 week, gone. Then Team Margaret happens. There's a rallying of support in the US for an Oscar campaign, an awards campaign, any kind of visibility, a larger release. I think there was a grudging expansion into a few more cities in the US. Didn't happen up here, or it happened here when it happened in the US. The timeline's all screwed up on this because I didn't review it, and so I missed it theatrically. And then Fox Searchlight sends out DVDs to certain awards bodies, not critics, just the Academy and I think maybe the Hollywood Foreign Press. No nominations. They're mum about a release date for DVD. Usually a film opens in the fall, it's out on disc by, February, March. Margaret finally surfaced in July, only available from Amazon in a Blu-ray double edition with Blu-ray of the theatrical cut and the DVD of the extended cut. Neither of which Lonergan will call the director's cut because he cut both of them and he refuses to pick. So, that's the info dump. But it seems pretty clear to me that the longer cut is the cut that he values.
Yes, yeah, I think he's said as much. And yeah, I think I read that he has a version. I think he just feels probably so protective and so. He admits that his stubbornness and his inability to sort of finish the film, played a significant role in all the drama that happened between him and the studio, and he couldn't. I've been there. It's hard to let go of something when you don't feel it's finished, when you don't feel satisfied or supported necessarily. In his case, but yeah, I'm pretty sure he alluded to there being an even longer version.
Did he talk about length? Any kind of time?
He might have. I don't remember.
Okay.
It was it felt just. I'll have to look it up, but I got the sense that it could have been an additional 30-40 minutes or something. I think they shot so many scenes. I think I think they just shot so much.
Yeah.
It's such a huge film.
In that earlier New York Times Magazine piece, Josh Hamilton says that the script, they did a reading of it before they shot it, months before, and it took all day. Oh, that's right,
Josh Hamilton's.
Yeah. He's in.
Yeah, and he's in Manchester by the Sea as well. I love his ensemble. Is his sort of like Mike Lee, like this movable ensemble that sort of rotates through different kinds of roles.
Yeah, and always somehow with Matthew Broderick is the voice of kind of flawed reason.
I know.
Which I find really interesting.
I think that's really interesting too. I have a theory about that.
Oh, please.
No, I don't know.
Come on, this is what this is for.
It's more of a conspiracy theory.
Now you have to tell me.
He is a...
It's like the authorial...
He's always flawed. He's always often kind of humiliated, I think. Maybe.
No, I'm with you. Go on.
But, I mean, I don't know if you know this, but he and Lonergan are childhood best friends.
Yeah. I
have this theory, which is, like, it's dark. But Matthew Broderick, young man on vacation in Ireland, is due to an automobile accident, takes the life of two people, is injured himself, and... They do press charges against him, but eventually it's just lessened to careless driving and a fine of $175. So, and he apologizes to the family.
Which is horrible anyway, but yeah, just...
And yet, so then you think about, not that there's like a direct line between that event and then the circumstances within Margaret, but like, as you might remember, there's like a great conversation between Lisa and the police officer played by Stephen Adly Gurgis, another fantastic playwright who's also often plays like voices of reason and cops in movies quite a bit.
He has the look.
He looks like it. He's amazing. Anyway, she's pushing for, why won't this bus driver get fired? Why can't he go to jail? And, the cop explains to her, like, he didn't commit a crime, maybe reckless driving, but it was an accident. Right. Even if he did go through this red light, to be charged with murder, to be charged with a crime, he had to intend to kill her. And you see in her head, this doesn't make sense because her notions of justice are have so little to do with the law. Mm-hmm. And so then you think about he was charged with careless driving. This bus driver in Margaret, played by Mark Ruffalo, which is such a fantastic, that character's so amazing because he's not evil, he's not a villain, and yet somehow I watched it I rewatched it last week and I was like, oh, I do want him to be punished. I do want, even though again, it was this sort of convergence of human error that led to someone's brutal death. Yeah.
And Lisa is just as culpable in that way, in that even if she didn't distract him fatally, she did lie about the color of the light to the police, which is something she does impulsively and then tries to correct. But then the movie is actively telling us he deserves some form of punishment. I think, but there's that glimpse at the headline that says driver had two other accidents.
Yes,
later in the film. These little revelations where the movie is telling you, I think, or Lonergan is
that
saying,
he has this pattern, perhaps, of reckless driving. And should that person be driving a bus in Manhattan? Like it's very interesting to me to create such an ambiguous villain within a film, if you do want to call him that, because nothing about him is intentionally bad. He's just like, he's feckless, he's kind of incompetent, and that is, I think, in our world, that's very often what causes like a great deal of damage within our society, is not people consciously intending to harm others. I feel like that when I think about myself at like Lisa's age, thinking very much in terms of like good and evil as being very, very black and white. Like that guy's a bad guy. That like in people I knew,
just making judgments.
Yeah, understanding humanity as not really being sort of on a continuum.
Right.
But then, and in some ways learning harshly that even I have caused harm or done bad things, not because I mean to, but out of some kind of unconscious cowardice or conscious cowardice. Like,
sure.
And then do you perceive, you don't perceive yourself as being evil because you've done something wrong. And yet I think sometimes there's this, the way we organize, the news, the media does this as well. Sure. People are slotted into this kind of person or that kind of person.
Yeah. John Ronson's book about public shaming has some remarkable insights into this.
Yeah.
Just the way that part of it is the media, and then part of it is the human mind's need to compartmentalize everything except itself. You can judge someone else so quickly, but then refuse to be judged yourself because you know what your story is, your complexities. And when we hear about something or see something that can be distilled into a couple of sentences, obviously you've already formed your opinion by the time you've read the second sentence, because you can judge everything as I would do this or I wouldn't do that, and it's just so binary. And yeah, Margaret gives you none of that. It's just throwing curves at you constantly about everything. Everything.
Like there is absolutely, none of those characters are like clear sort of moral centers, if you want to think that anyone could be that. But very often a character is endowed with a great sort of moral anchoring force in art, in film, in narrative art, I guess. Sure. Sometimes, often. I'm going to make a sweeping statement.
Well, it's a pretty good one. A case could be made.
But, there's this thing in Margaret where he kind of abandons you within that. Like, I this time when I watched it, so this is the third time I watched it, I became really, really fascinated by the character of Lisa's mother, who's played by J. Smith Cameron, who is a wonderful actor and also Lonergan's long-term partner.
And a number of interesting choices just in having her play the role, because of course he casts himself as Lisa's absent father who's in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I love the fact that he makes these weird, like an absent god appearances in his own work in Manchester too, when he shows up and just has
that is words. A ridiculous cameo,
and you just sit there going, of course you would.
And his role in You Can Count on Me is so amazing. Like that very, that priest character is perhaps he's sort of like a philosopher, like more than. But I realized I strayed from my conspiracy theory.
Oh, we'll get back to it.
Okay.
And I don't want to lose the thread on J. Smith Cameron either, who is phenomenal in this film. And a role that, again, refuses to give us what we need from it, which is that the mother is supposed to know what to do. Like, it really that's clearly what Lisa wants.
She makes so many mistakes, and she suffers. Mm-hmm. She's I think what I was so fixated on was the fact that the mother's like fatal mistake is in advising Lisa to lie.
Yeah.
And then Lisa punishes her for the rest of the film until that final moment.
Yeah. And it's the right choice, isn't it? It doesn't feel like a mistake when she does it. It feels like she's trying to support her daughter and get her out of something quickly.
Doesn't it feel easy? Doesn't it feel like the easiest choice?
It does, but I can see how a mother would want, the impulse for her is to make it go away.
Yes.
Which is what Lisa wants. She doesn't, at the moment, she just wants this to not have happened.
And yet, shouldn't also a parent say, tell the truth? Shouldn't a parent advise you to be as honest as possible, especially when it relates to someone's life and death?
I agree.
But
when it's tested,
exactly.
That's what she does.
Then do you become pragmatic? Do you say, well, this has traumatized my daughter. The woman's dead. She had no attachments, and yet this man is still alive.
Yeah.
You know, but then they also kind of frame her as I absolutely love just the sort of the satire of a grown woman who's an actor, who's a theater actor. Like she seems so young, so immature in so many ways, and she requires so much attention from her daughter. And at a certain point, and yet she's also such a lovely character too.
She has the relationship going on with Jean Reno's character, which goes in directions that are perhaps the most mature and intelligent. Like, just I guess he's another truth teller in that he's someone who is presented as knowing himself and being secure in literally everything he does, to the point where he says at one point, it doesn't matter if we don't appear to fit well together. I like you and you like me. And that's an articulation of something that, probably happens more often in real life than in movies, where people speak the truth, romantic truths to people, and they're that flat, almost. Because it's the opposite of romantic, except that it is a declaration of intent. But no one knows what to do with it in cinema.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Thank you. Yeah.
I know, and I guess like that makes me think of some of another part of the film that one sort of an underpinning to like basically every micro plot within the film is like how mysterious they are. Like you said, that he has this statement where he's, I like you, you like me. But as soon as you said that, I was like, does she like him? Like, you never really, like, she kind of agrees, and he's...
True. She just sort of sticks around. It's not even a question.
You understand, like, or one understands that she's a lonely woman. She has a satisfying work life, but she's also being, her daughter is kind of shutting her out a little bit. She's vulnerable because something that they refer to a whole bunch is like, my play's opening, which at a certain point is played for sort of triviality. I don't know if you remember when Emily and I can't wait to talk about Emily, because that character is to me unprecedented in like any story. Like, she's to me like one of the smartest invented characters I've ever encountered outside of literature.
Okay.
Anyway.
We'll get there. Think of it as a nesting doll. We just keep opening it up and finding new stuff. And
yes. I mean, that was one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this film. Was like, I could talk about it endlessly. It just does feel like there's so much to unpack in every beat of it. Okay, I've said like 4 different things and completed none of them.
Oh, okay.
But we were talking about J. Smith Cameron as the mother and Jean Reno. That's, I think, where we were. And, she has this thing at the end where at his funeral...
Yeah, it's okay. People don't know.
Yeah.
Another unresolved plot point, basically, is that he suddenly isn't there anymore.
Yes.
Like, that's just where the story
And he leaves her with this incredible mystery when his son comes to him and says, he as soon as he met you, he knew that he wanted to marry you because he hadn't connected with anyone since, like his wife, who had passed away. And it's almost comic because all of their exchanges that they've had have been felt so superficial. Like her, I love that, after they go to the opera and she says, isn't it pretentious the way they say brava and bravi? And he's like, no, that's the female and then that's the plural. And she's like, but isn't it pretentious? And he's like, no, it's just the correct. It's just, he's just so literal. Like he can't speak to her the way she wants to be spoken to. And so repeatedly they show her just kind of sort of petering her, whatever argument she was trying to make kind of peters out.
Yeah.
And you don't look at it and think, oh my gosh, they have incredible chemistry or they're so connected. And then she has that told to her by a stranger. She's bewildered by it, and then she asks Lisa, she says like, what did you make of that? And Lisa, like, is so cynical, is like, people can't relate to each other. Like, people don't know each other.
Right.
And then...
Which is kind of right, but also...
But it's also, again, very much in the opposite direction. Mm-hmm. We were talking about sort of black and white before, binaries. Yeah. It's like people are either super connected or not connected at all. When in fact, throughout the film, what we actually see are like people experiencing short-term connections of varying sort of intensity.
Yeah.
And pain or pleasure, you know, but they're still connections.
Yeah.
And
that sense of life as a lattice work of connections and constant interacting and intersection comes out a lot more in the longer cuts, simply because the sound design involves us in the conversations of everyone. Literally everyone in the space is talking, and you can hear bits and pieces of it. The diner scene is almost inaudible in a couple of scenes because this other conversation crashes into it. Mm-hmm. And there's this constant movement through Manhattan where the God's eye view of a number of shots where you just have the sense that you're watching insects moving around, and each of them is going somewhere.
Cars moving, like headlights in the darkness, or that beautiful opening sequence of like the enormous like tide of bodies walking in slow motion, and again, like, accompanied by some profound classical song as he, like, have you seen Manchester by the Sea? Okay.
Yeah. And there's definitely a continuity, not only in the music, but it struck me watching Manchester that everybody talks about how it's a film about grief. I think it's a film about guilt. I mean, it's about both, but it's about how horrible it is to know you deserve to be punished and not be punished.
Punishment.
Yeah, and tries over and over again. And the idea that it's not about sadness for him anymore, that it's turned into this weird martyrdom, this self-martyrdom.
Yes.
That he must destroy. I mean, just I'm hesitant to spoil Manchester by the Sea for people who haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
But I mean, Jesus Christ, the need in Affleck's performance and in the character, because it's all on the page, just the need to pay for something that he has been. And the same thing happens in Manchester as happens in Margaret, where someone is told it's not illegal,
not a crime.
It's just awful.
I think they say to him that happened to like 10 other people same night.
The line is, you made the same mistake a million people made, which is just even more of a dismissal. And they're all sympathetic, and they understand that they want it to be okay for him, and it'll never be okay. But everyone is trying to put the best possible face on it. Years later,
you do also get the sense that that some people he is still kind of a pariah, though. When he goes to the rink and they're
I'm thinking about that exact scene, and I don't know if he's a pariah or if he is like. Do people understand how culpable he feels he is, or do they just know the story about this guy that lost this part of his life, which again we can't really talk about, but
and there's also that scene
watching it over and over again.
I agree. I've sort of imposed some meaning that may or may not be there, but then he also goes onto the ship to ask for work, and the woman is like, I never want to see him again, and you don't know why. Could be for any number of reasons.
That's even before the revelation, right? We don't see that
I don't think you know why, but you also,
that's right.
It could also just be, but it also, you see him. Like, yes, absolutely, guilt, like, and self-punishment. He's sort of like, I thought about that Kafka story, The Hunger Artist. No one, in his case, he just, like, the chaos of the events that kind of, like, came together to create this tragedy and leave him alone, also. He's, like, brutally alone now. He just has to... But not only does he isolate himself, but as you said, he also like seeks out like punishment. Yeah. Typically,
excoriation in
and
public places,
and also just like denies himself. Like, I was thinking, it's something that I found really compelling about that film is that you don't really see this very often when there's like a sort of a tragic male figure. Usually, if he's like drinking, if he's like, usually you see him like seeking comfort in the company of women, to put it euphemistically.
It's a romanticization of suffering.
Yes. And it's like and there's like, instead, what I thought was so interesting and so contesting ideas of conventional masculinity is you see him rejecting any kind of comfort from women again and again, you know, and it feels too much of a pattern to think of as anything other than like very conscious on his part. Like sometimes it's played for comedy, like so there's the woman who like spills the drink on him, you know, but then also when
and the woman in the apartment in Boston who
who
can't act on it exactly,
but he hears her talking about it, or then like her his nephew's girlfriend's mother who invites him in, and he sits there for like what feels like 30 seconds before he finally says no, you know?
And it's just, it's this weird comic engine that drives the movie that people are attracted to. The women are attracted to him, and he won't do anything with it because, again, it's about self-punishment and self-rejection. But it forms this amazing, weird... I keep coming back to the screenplay because the TFCA awards were just last week as we're recording this, and Affleck was up for Best Actor, and we gave it to Adam Driver, and who was wonderful. And the argument I made against Affleck winning was simply that what Driver does is create the aesthetic of the movie along with the movie, and what Affleck does is an excellent performance of a script that is itself excellent. And you know, I think kind of anybody who looks at the floor and stands right is going to make that scene work. Affleck's very good.
Yes, I agree with you.
The work is on the page for me.
It was a great role, and he delivered it very well. I agree. I think I'm also less likely to want to celebrate him.
There is also that. And there's this weird place that we're in now where my impulse is to believe every word of those accusations because it sounds
very factual
and believable. Yeah,
the accounts just I mean, when I think about that, he made work environments very unsafe for women who he had hired to work with him.
It sounds kind of awful.
He professionally undermined them in a really terrible way. And then I look at something like Manchester by the Sea, and I know what Lonergan is like anecdotally as a director, but I would imagine that he made that space very safe for Casey Affleck to give that kind of performance. And I don't want to celebrate the good work he did because someone else supported him when he has not provided that for. And the fact is that I believe is that if he treated those women in that way, I can't imagine he treats other people he works with very well either.
It just doesn't speak to a general personality.
Yeah.
Right. The weird thing that I keep thinking about is having seen I'm Still Here, which is the production where all of this supposedly happened. I can also see someone who isn't particularly mature deciding that you need to act this way in order to make the movie that he's making. But that's also bad. Like, that's not a defense. Yeah. That's just equally stupid and ultimately just as misogynistic. There's no good answer to any of this except that he does good work with other people, and so awards bodies are more likely to overlook the personal stuff and, you know, just write it off as saying, well, it's still being litigated. We don't have to talk about it. It's just, you can't not. It's all part of it. And yeah, what he does in Manchester by the Sea is very good, but it's hard to separate that from this awful other thing he seems to have thought necessary to do as an artist. So, fortunately, we're mostly talking about Margaret. So
it's true. Yes. And so that feels like a good moment to come back to because speaking of keeping sort of like the details of a person's life separate from the work that they do creatively, you know. Matthew Broderick. I was going to say Matthew Broderick was a human being. I think he probably still is.
I've met him. He seems pretty young.
But I can only imagine that experiencing something like that, it was in his late 20s, I think. You know, and that's still a kind of young, like formative time in one's life. How has that that must color so much of his life.
I can't imagine it ever goes away.
How, and then I look at something like Margaret or Manchester by the Sea, or even You Can Count on Me, all of which feature traumatic deaths. Two of them vehicular.
Yeah.
One of them we won't mention because it's in the more recent film. But then, like, his best friend who, had this incredibly traumatic event, didn't happen to him, but it was something that he participated in. He has these deaths on his hands in a way.
Okay.
He, through this strange legal recourse, he paid $175 fine and apologized to the family, and is, married to Sarah Jessica Parker and makes movies, and a lot of people just kind of don't know about this.
Yeah, life simply goes on.
Yes. And so I look at something like Margaret, and one of the final shots is of her and her mother, seeing Mark Ruffalo drive by on the bus, because after all that, he's still kept his job. They've just bumped him to another route. And it is heartbreaking, because you think, he should have been at the very least fired, But I sometimes feel like there is that Broderick is some creative engine to Lonergan, and that by participating in these films, he has a kind of self-awareness, or that maybe he's engaging in some creative penance. Again, I have no proof of this.
I'm fascinated by the idea, though, that he's cast him in all three films, always on the periphery. Like, he's never had to engage with the characters he plays. Don't have to engage with the trauma at the heart of any of the films. And especially in Manchester, he's someone who is incredibly awkward and apparently, given that the character is either a born again Christian or a very, very pious Christian, supposedly the most moral character in the orbit of the film, because he also acts to protect his wife and he is doing everything correctly. But it's weird and off-putting.
Oh, there's a coldness and a kind of
or calculation.
Hyper-control.
Yeah. And so he is remarkably, for a film about ambiguity and refusal to provide closure, Manchester gives you the most ambiguous and strange character of all of them, and it's Matthew Broderick.
That's true. It's funny, in that film, that, like, Gretchen Mol... I'm like, Gretchen Mall's still around?
Yeah. I get why Lonergan would want to cast her. I also get why Lonergan would cast Michelle Williams in a role that seems to have nothing for her to do until she does. And she becomes absolutely essential. The same thing happens in Margaret, where, Mark Ruffalo's just here because they're buddies and he made You Can Count on Me. It's like, oh, no, shit, there's stuff for him to do. It just takes forever to get there.
Yes, that scene outside the house. His face is doing so much.
It's amazing. and this is what I mean about his casting sense. There are no small parts. He knows he's going to need something from everybody when he works with them. And so his decisions to put Broderick where he puts him seem even more considered. And now that you've brought this theory up, it actually smacks a lot of stuff into place in a way for me that I hadn't really considered.
I don't know, like, knowing that they have been, like, Lonergan would have known Broderick while he was going through this. Yeah. It's as much in the same way that when you're very close with someone, a tragedy strikes and you're there for it. It becomes in some ways part of your life too.
Right.
And it's hard not to look at some of Lonergan's creative, the creative questions he continues to ask as being in some ways connected to that, to culpability, particularly related to someone's literal life and death.
Yeah, no, it's really quite remarkable, because they are all about, and Margaret is all about being party to a tragedy, and You Can Count on Me is about surviving one, and Manchester in a weird way is about not surviving it. But there are like the three different facets.
Or like surviving it physically.
Yeah, but being so defined by it that it ruins you. And every character even the characters who I can't remember. Was it Lucas Hedges' character? The kid,
Patrick.
Patrick is enduring his own peripheral tragedy. I mean, he's just lost his father, and he's reacting to it more or less the same way Lisa does in Margaret, which is just to sort of push forward and still be uniquely selfish as a teenager has to be, I guess, right?
Yeah.
There's no other way. But I love the fact that he thinks he's clever and the movie knows he isn't. That there are these little clues in Manchester. Every time he tries to have sex with his girlfriend and can't, he uses a math metaphor, and the adults can see right through it.
Yeah.
How's the calculus coming? It's very frustrating. He's not as smart as he thinks he is, and I love movies that do that. Lisa has moments like that too in Margaret.
Yes. She's like, she has more confidence and more personality and more like. She's such an appealing character. Like, in one thing that they cut in the longer version is her, like, after she bumps into Matt Damon when he's on his bike, and she's sort of flirting with him a bit, and she's so awkward. Like, she's just saying such like like stuff that makes you cringe, and then as he rides away, she yells something like I made you laugh, like I can die. Like, she just makes some kind of hyperbolic statement, like screams it on the streets of New York, like something that only, a 17-year-old would have and still be like, still know how adorable she is,
Yeah, it's remarkable. It's, I think someone actually says it. I'm not sure in which version of the film, but somebody basically says you're the star of your own movie, or that she.
That's Jeannie Berlin, yeah, in that scene where she's, she's talking about how as Monica, played by Allison Janney, and like something that Allison Janney's death scene for me is like probably one of my favorite death scenes in any movie ever, because it's just you spend like 5 minutes with this woman. And in that 5 minutes, she's just been hit by a bus and she's dying. And you somehow know exactly what she's like just from the way she dies.
You know everything about her from her death.
Yes. That later on when Jeannie Berlin is eulogizing her and says something like, and as we all know, she was impossible to get along with. You're like, yes, I could see that. Just in the way she somehow manages to piss off the man who's trying to like make a tourniquet, and he's like, ma'am, I'm trying to help you here. She's like screaming at him while she...
Actually, now that I'm thinking about the stretcher attendants in Manchester, like the well-meaning but inept
with the
medical world.
Yeah, with the gurney. Yes, that... No, it's...
Lonergan has a lot of time for... He seems to know what to do himself. I suspect if he got hit by a bus, he'd know exactly what to do.
I think so, too.
But Janney's great. And Jeannie Berlin, who apparently is only brought out by filmmakers when they absolutely need to remind you that Jeannie Berlin is one of the greatest overlooked actors of her generation, because she's never bad. Like, she's always fantastic. But
I love her.
Never turns up in anything.
No, and she and someone like Allison Janney, I love character actors, and I love trying to devote myself to female character actors, because so often I feel like I should speak for myself, I pay attention to the beautiful movie stars, and yet then I remember that there are these other kinds of actors, and I like to take some time to celebrate their work.
Well, Berlin definitely deserves so. I mean, I don't know what Woody Allen did with what he thought he was doing with her in Cafe Society, but she's completely wasted.
Oh, I didn't see Cafe Society.
Best not. But Berlin's fantastic in this. And again, she's sort of the film's truth teller in a film that is filled with people who think they're truth tellers. She's the one who just cuts through the bullshit and just delivers that incredible... It's not even a condemnation, just this dismissal of the small, annoying person who's insinuated herself into her life, who she's trying to be nice to, and then just decides she shouldn't be.
Well, it would be... I think about that, and I think about how horrible if I were in Lisa's position, this woman who I admire, who I've kind of like adopted as a sort of maternal figure, who's been very like accommodating and like, when she told her that she lied, when she told her that Monica was in pain and knew she was dying, these incredibly painful things to tell this woman's best friend who wasn't present at her best friend's death.
Yeah.
And like the moment that she gets angry at her is not when she tells her something painful, but when she tries to when she tries to make a story, when she tries to romanticize her presence and say, like I remember getting a chill when she's like, when Lisa's explaining, like, Monica asked me to call her daughter, who was also named Lisa, and I was confused because that's my name. And I think, in those last moments, maybe I was sort of that for her. Mm-hmm. And you just, while she's been saying this, like Jeannie Berlin's just been standing there watching her, like, just like stone, like just so stony faced. And then she's like, oh, so, like, did Lisa's spirit like leave your body like after she died, or is she still with you? Like, the sarcasm is so so scathing, like, and yet, like, that, like, what Lisa does in that moment is it's so regular. Like, I've probably did that. I probably did something like that. I so identify with that, that desire to make something meaningful, to write yourself into the story.
And to also, I think, make it okay for the person who's listening to you, to give them that kind of closure, because, I understand where she's coming from. She's trying to make it okay for this woman to have lost her best friend and say that the death was at least, in some way peaceful, but she doesn't have the resources to really figure it out. So she makes herself the hero. I mean, inadvertently, I think. I don't think she's doing it out of narcissism. It's just how her 17-year-old head works.
Yes,
that's all she's got.
Yeah, it is. It's meant to be something like comfort. It's meant to be something like comfort to say that your best friend maybe had the feeling of being with her daughter, her daughter who died. And also it makes me a kind of heroic figure because I got to be that person. Yeah. So it's both of those things, both of which Emily, like Jeannie Berlin, is offended by, because she, at where she is in her life, she has no room for that kind of myth making. She's just and you don't know anything about her. Yeah. Like, there's a reference to her having children at one point. She like, I think it's, oh man, he cuts his some of his he often lets scenes sort of trail off, but some of his like very quick cuts away always like end on a really good comic note. Daniel and I love the one scene where, that like incredible scene where Matthew Broderick is arguing with the student about Lear. Yeah. And he like angrily takes a bite out of a sandwich and a sip of juice, and he opens the book and he just goes, "Poor Tom's a cold," and it just like cuts. Like, it's But yeah, Jeannie Berlin similarly says, like, I met Monica when I was 19, which I know my children would find hard to believe, and then I think it cuts away. But that she has children. That she lives in this apartment, this nice apartment, but you don't know anything about her life. Yeah. That she's friends with this young lawyer for some reason, who she implies that she's known since he was a little boy, but so much of her story is just completely omitted.
I wonder if it's because I always try to figure out, in a movie where Lisa's told that she thinks she's the star of her own movie, she actually is.
Yes.
This is her movie, more or less, except it's constantly distracted by everything else around her. I was trying to figure out if Lonergan doesn't show us more because Lisa doesn't perceive her as existing. So many of these characters only seem to really be present when Lisa is with them. Mm-hmm. We know nothing
Which
less
is why it's kind of interesting that they do show those scenes between J. Smith Cameron and Jean Reno. Like, it
gets away.
There are some private,
things that she's not privy, things that Lisa's not privy to.
Exactly, that Lisa doesn't know.
But so much of it is there for us. Maybe it's because in that case we're not supposed to fill in the blanks and wonder. We need to know. We need to see what her mother's going through, so we can understand why Lisa's handling it so badly. In a strange way. It's that other thing about growing up is when you realize, if I'd known that I would have acted differently. And then realizing, no, I was 18, I was an idiot. I would still probably have... who was it? Oh, it was Ryan Johnson said the reason he made Looper was because he was offered the opportunity. Like somebody said, you know, with time travel, what would you do if you could go back in time and see yourself? And it's like, oh my God, I'd murder myself. I was such an asshole. And this film is that kind of same echo. Yeah. It's an adult's film about adolescence and maturity, and it has such a clear eye as to where Lisa is in her life. That's the thing that I find so incredibly uncomfortable watching it, is just knowing that she's, hopefully, if she's lucky, she's going to grow up and realize just how awfully she's behaved. But she's not a bad person.
She's not a bad person. If anything, what you feel like, what I feel, I do feel like the film ends on, it ends on a very cathartic note, with like the tales of Hoffman and them weeping at the Met. You know, boy, that must have been crazy to shoot. You know, there's like this beautiful opera, which allows for so much feeling. I think people have said this, that there's throughout Margaret, there's this promise or rather possibility that art is something that can help you, or not help you, but can sort of draw you forward or help sort of organize feelings of grief or guilt or something, or bring people back together again. This feels much blunter than I mean it to be. But and then it's interesting because then something like I look at Margaret and Manchester by the Sea as being like brother sister films. I actually think of Manchester by the Sea as being his like Catholic guilt film, and Margaret as being his Jewish guilt film.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, because ultimately, yes, Margaret is if you have to boil it down to a single log line, it was just like, what are you gonna do? I mean, it really is kind of a New York shrug.
Yeah.
Compared to the heavy Boston grief and portent and
the incredible the I had like the overwhelming silence of Manchester by the Sea is in there are so many there are like all those very comic scenes between like the cousins and the lawyer and Emily and Lisa all just talking over each other in the conference call, like these effusive Jewish women versus like taciturn Catholic men.
It's true. Even before character in Manchester dies, he is just quiet about it.
Yes.
You know, given this death sentence. Well, that's how long. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And then Gretchen Mol can't. That's one of the reasons why she.
Oh, that's right. She doesn't even speak.
She can't handle it. She he's making a joke. She gets up and storms out. Yeah. You know.
And you get all the hostility between her and the younger brother, and this whole history of things not fitting in that movie. Oh God, I want to watch that again right now. That's Lonergan for you, though. He's so good at this. He builds worlds and then leaves us in them, and then just rattles around for a little while. And sometimes there's a revelation that changes lives, and sometimes you just realize, nope, this is going to keep going. And
he doesn't care about exposition, which is something that's nice. He leaves it to you. He you meet people and you don't know what their relationships are to each other. Yeah. So you're like, is Gretchen Mol someone's sister? And then you're like, oh, no, she's the wife. She's the wife. So you figure these things out later.
She's the wife. Why is she leaving the room? She just found out about the conflicting desires. And it's fun. And, he avoids to an almost, I was going to say an almost frustrating point, but it's not frustrating, is it? He just knows when things need to land, and he lets you figure your way to them. The phrase "you can count on me" is never spoken in "You Can Count on Me."
No,
but it ends with that amazing scene where Ruffalo says, "What did I used to tell you when we were kids?" And you just, you start crying. I know what that is.
Yeah,
it was in words at the beginning.
I know.
But it's just, he's so good at that, and I'm angry at him for only making 3 movies in 15 years because I want more.
Well, you could go watch, Analyze This if you want to get more. No, of course. That's,
he does say that the greatest thing in that New York Times piece, the one from 2011, he does say that he wrote that to get paid.
Yes.
And it went through 14 other writers after he let go of it, and so he doesn't consider it his own anymore. But I do want to watch it again now and see if I can find any connections. Like what 2 or 3 lines of dialogue survived.
Mm-hmm. Well, even just the idea of it, is which I don't know if it was. I never read that New York Times Magazine piece, but I know from the New Yorker piece that his family, his mother and his stepfather were psychiatrists, and so that idea of like a mob boss seeking treatment
2 years before The Sopranos too.
Yes.
Prescient.
Yes, played for comedy. I can imagine that if had Lonergan sort of made his own film version of that, it would have been it would have had a very different tone.
I'm sure, yeah.
Cast, I don't know, who would have been in Kenneth Lonergan's direction of analyze this?
Which roles would you, well, I mean, obviously, do we do it in period? Do we figure out for 1996 or 7 who you would have picked? Because that's interesting too.
Do you think Broderick could have been the Billy Crystal character? Do you think?
Sure. I mean, why not?
Matthew Broderick as Billy Crystal.
No reason not to. I mean,
in Analyze. So just
producers era Matthew Broderick could have done it. Sure.
Okay, and then who would have been De Niro?
Well, Billy Crystal, obviously.
Just bump it.
Yeah, that's right. In mid-90s, Kevin Spacey, maybe. Right after 7. He had the edge. He also
I want to take from Lonergan's. I want to take from from his ensemble that he likes to work with.
Well, Ruffalo would have been too young. Although he could have done it. He could do anything. Basically.
It's true. I believe in Ruffalo in that way as well.
Yeah.
He's
Is there anyone who's even old enough who has the appropriate age range for this?
That's true. I guess
he doesn't have a lot of older male characters. Like Renault's probably the oldest person of the 3 films.
And probably during Analyze This, he would have been a bit.
He would have just come off The Professional. He was.
Yeah, you're right. Those were very
peak form Renault.
Was that like 98, 99 or like mid 90s?
94.
94. Ooh, okay, I was.
Yeah. Analyze This is probably, I'm thinking 96, 97.
Peak Renault.
It's a thing.
I think so. I thought he gave a very understated comic performance in Margaret.
No, he's great. He's exactly. I mean, he's the casting is exactly what it needs to be because he's this put together European gentleman, but he has these really kind, sad, sour, soggy eyes. Mm-hmm. So even when he's being kind of, Asperger's-y in his diagnosis of things, you see that there's something in there.
Yes, that behind his simplicity, there's like a warmth that she can't even really she doesn't understand.
Yeah.
Because for her, everything is now I'm forgetting Joan. Joan is J. Smith Cameron's name. Everything's so conditional.
Right.
Or, and this is thinking, I think about how so much of who she is defined by her profession as an actor, and her identity, her personality relies very much on the cues that people give her. Mm-hmm. And so she just can't seem to quite read his cues. So she in all of their scenes together, she seems sort of half formed. She's always kind of staring at him with these wide open eyes, being like, "Oh, I wish I knew more." She says that a few times.
Yeah, she's hoping for just further data.
Yeah.
How to respond.
She doesn't know about his country. She doesn't know about opera in the way he's talking about it. So, anyway, yeah.
Again, everybody has more. There is more to see and more to be revealed about every one of these characters.
And it's beautiful because you do have a lot of. I find I have such curiosity about all of them, which is a great gift, I think, as a storyteller, if you can make all of your characters that interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. You lean into these movies in a way that, or I do anyway, in a way that I don't for a lot of other people's. I just find them so rich with unspoken detail. There's all this, they're lived in. There's stuff going on everywhere. Mm-hmm. And so that brings us around really to the final question of the podcast, which is always the same, which is there anything that you've lifted or borrowed or stolen or incorporated into your own creative DNA? You've been on stage, you've been in cinema. have you ever Lonerganed? Have you ever gone for that?
Well, I guess I did already sort of, I jumped on this, but like, I find that, I guess if I can think of like one thing that I'm sure I've unconsciously lifted a ton, because I've just spent like so many years of my adult life being really, really like devoted to understanding why Lonergan's work is so good to me, and wanting to emulate his ability as a storyteller and just his kind of moral, or maybe not moral universe, but sort of like philosophical universe, which is so interesting and rich. But I was doing a play a few months ago, and I think it's okay if I say this because the play's over and it's never going to happen again. Well, I don't think it will. But in the play, the character I was playing I am bitten by my husband, and the implication is that he cannibalizes me. Okay. This is, I didn't contextualize this at all.
Let him wonder.
It was I guess just to provide a little bit of context. It was not an overly realistic play. It was set. We were settlers coming to Canada. This sort of like somewhat expressionistic / comic exploration of colonialism, and also gender politics. There we go. There it is. I should never ever write the press release for this play. But yes, so in the final scene, the character who plays my husband, who is sort of, we don't have a loving relationship. I'm very cruel to him. He bites me, and I'm bleeding out. And the way we had worked it out in rehearsals is like I'm sort of bleeding, and I kind of come over to him, and we say a few things to each other, and then I die, or possibly just pass out. I die, I think. Okay. But I think at one point, and I'd been in one rehearsal, I'd sort of been like, oh, it's so sad. I just got murdered. Like that was, I was feeling I think the natural choice I made was to play a sort of like life is draining out of me. Mm-hmm. And then I was looking at the guy who plays my husband, who is a really wonderful comedian and actor named John Blair. Okay, yeah. Who's who I found he gave me a lot of very interesting behavioral cues, but I just felt real pissed off at him. And I remember this was now in performance, I think one of our second or third performances, but instead of kind of like sort of gently crawling over to him, like, oh, these are my last breaths, I'm coming. I like clawed my way over to him, and I saw his face change. He was like scared. And then we talked about it afterwards, and he was like, you looked like you were coming over there to like, like to really, really give it to me. And I was like, you fucking, oh, sorry, I swore. No,
you can swear.
I was like, you just killed me. Like, I'm very angry at you still. And I remember thinking to myself, Allison Janney gets hit by a bus. She gets brutally hit by a bus, dragged under a bus. She knew her character so well, yeah, that even though we never got to see what that character was like in life, I was like, this is amazing. Even in death, she's like a battle axe. Like, yeah. Why give that up just because you're dying? And it became something I really looked forward to, just playing my death in a really enraged manner.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It gave you permission.
Yeah, I guess just like, I don't know what it's like to die. But somehow the cliche that I naturally went to is that when you die, there's sort of like a lessening of the self and maybe a gentleness or something.
Right, the
as you succumb.
Suffering thing.
Yeah, suffering. But I like the character I played throughout the entirety of this production had been like really brutal and cold and cruel. Why would she stop when she probably has like the last like kind of spike of adrenaline? She's like probably gonna try and like put his eyes out or something, like, but maybe she lost a little too much blood before she got there. So yeah, I think probably that moment and like various other and that's one of those things where you don't know if that's the writing or if that's Alice and Janney. But I think sort of throughout Margaret and Lonergan's work at large, but especially Margaret, people just don't quite behave the way you expect them to, and it kind of reminds you that reality is very confusing.
That's something we should carry with us, I think, because everybody's looking for resolution in their daily life to everything, and sometimes it just doesn't happen. I'm tempted to just let this episode drift away. Have a close. But yeah, it's just his films feel more like reality. His films feel more like life, unfocused and still focused at the same time. There's a perspective, but it's not exclusive, I guess, if that makes sense. There's always room for something else to happen and other stuff to be going on. Yeah,
and it feels kind of like he sometimes makes the choice to sort of leave. He's like, here's a moment when I could leave while they're crying there. Like it's, that their lives continue and like there absolutely could have been another scene after that and another scene after that. He could have just kept, like, his films are very modular. Mm-hmm. Like, they don't, they have these like small kind of peaks and dips, but they maybe, structurally, he does like to let things meander a bit and he often ends on like a real mid-note, like Manchester. You Can Count on Me, I feel like had a sort of, I mean, that film is so much more contained than the other two.
It's the one of the three that feels like it could have been a play.
Yes,
It feels like a very stage ending where that's exactly when the lights drop. Mm-hmm. That's how it ends. Mm-hmm. And it works. It works on film.
Yeah.
But the other two are very much not. Like, they could only be movies. They're cinematic narratives. They play with time. They play with space. I mean, I'm sure you can stage anything. But they feel like Margaret would need to be staged like in a warehouse the size of the one that Philip Seymour Hoffman does in New York. It is the whole of the city in that module.
Yeah.
Running through it like a bus that's out of control. Bad example.
I do love that Margaret ends in, an opera house, a theater.
Yeah. Well, you were saying earlier when you were talking about the music being the clearest. I think that art is the truth teller in this movie. Even when they're fighting over King Lear, they're telling, and in that theatrical exercise, that little trust game they play, they're being their real selves only in moments where performance is in play or where art is in the space with them. And so when the opera scene happens, it feels, I mean, it's cathartic because it's supposed to be, because that's where we are. But I think we are as surprised by the emotional swells as Lisa and her mother are. They've just, no one is expecting that to play the way it does, and it's so powerful.
Yes.
Because you're just being shaken by her response, by Lisa's response.
Oh, it's that scene, that final scene is so, it's complicated in a way that, like, you'd be like, because like, I don't know if you remember this, I'm sure you do, but like the two operas, it's like Renee Fleming and another opera singer who I didn't recognize, but they're two women, one of whom is in drag.
Yeah.
And so they're playing a romantic scene. So that's interesting that it's obviously two women singing to each other, but one of them is in the role of a male.
Yeah.
And then Lisa, like, it's not the story that's being told, but rather just the feeling of that music, which is has such a sort of swelling emotional quality to it.
It's like a yearning almost for connection, that sort of wailing to each other.
And that sort of causes her to break. And then what's interesting is that her mother actually responds to her, not to the opera.
Yeah, she's been singing quite stoically.
Yeah, she's watching it. You know, she's probably enjoying it. But they even have that earlier scene when she's watching with Jean Reno and she goes, "This is beautiful," and he shushes her. Yeah. But you get the sense that, you know, maybe she just would have been like, "This is beautiful." But it's actually seeing her daughter, like, moved that sort of moves her.
Right. And she doesn't even know what it is. I mean, we do because we've been with Lisa the whole time. It's this sort of the proximity thing where we have been closer to this character than her own mother has. And we know why she's breaking down. And her mother almost does, but doesn't quite, because she's not connecting to the opera the same way. So it's almost tragic, except that then they do connect. And you can just...
and she lets her connect too. She like reciprocates, but there's this like funny kind of daisy chain of people watching people watching people. Yeah,
and all of it is like, again, it's the mission statement of the film, right? That everything is part of the same thing.
Yeah.
Even if we don't want it to be, or even if we don't understand how it could be. It's,
And then just those included shots of like other people in the audience, just their faces watching. It's very, I always find it interesting when filmmakers are like, here's a shot of the audience, because an audience member's face doesn't really tell you that much. But I think in like all of his like city shots, his city shots, building shots, what those faces do remind you is that they are not alone. There are like hundreds of other people here who are also having like a deeply private experience as well.
The elevator moment with Smith Cameron when she breaks down and has to compose herself because someone else wanders in.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes, that's not in the short version.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
God, it's not?
No.
Jesus. I remember it being in there. That's weird. I've inserted it retroactively because it should be there. And it's essential.
J. Smith Cameron I find her so adorable. Like she's because she's a grown woman, but there's something about her that kind of makes me think that there's just something about her that like reminds me of probably like what she was like as like a child. Even like like a scene that I love that's totally there just for fun is her doing her impressions of like Shirley Temple in A Baby.
Yeah.
And I honestly feel like, I mean, that feels like just a scene of some like levity and, you know, actors hanging out after a show. But that to me feels so much like Kenneth Lonergan just like being in love with his wife and like knowing that she has this odd little skill and creating space for her, you know, to do it. Because you do see her daughter totally in love with her in that moment. as I feel too when I watch that scene as well, because she's just so brilliant in that tiny way.
Yeah, and he's hung on to this and found a place for it.
Yes,
He wants to show us.
And then to like that elevator scene, she's so good at just kind of dissolving in really, really like deep sadness, and then also just kind of like going like arcing through when someone comes in and like just kind of after like 12 seconds having like that sort of like serene smile on her face again. She's a really special actor. I'm glad I'm glad she's on Rectify, which is a show that
just wrapping up now, isn't it?
Yes, season? Is this the last season?
I think it's actually just finished.
I didn't know they weren't renewing it.
Oh, yeah, but it's a conclusion. I think that.
Okay, I'm a few episodes behind.
This is the 4th season, I think, and
yeah.
they brought it. They are.
I love it.
I'm sorry.
I love it so
Abigail
much.
Spencer's off on Timeless, so the bell was ringing.
But she's wonderful in it.
That's great.
And it's just nice to be able to see an actor like her to see her do so much.
Yeah, well, this is a good recommendation. If you guys listening have not seen Rectified, definitely dive in. It is a weird, slow, lumpy, unpredictable kind of show. Like, it is not television in the conventional sense of the term.
No, it's funny. You say slow, I say meditative.
Oh, I like it.
Okay.
It does line up.
It is odd.
It lines up in a weird way with Lonergan's work in that it refuses to be anything but itself. Mm-hmm. And is satisfying, but you kind of have to surrender to it.
Mm-hmm. And it's like if Kenneth Lonergan maybe were to make like like a Southern Gothic.
Yeah. And everybody in it is great, and now they're all doing other stuff too, so you just start to see them pop up here and there and go, cool, that person.
And it's also, again, something we didn't talk about with Lonergan, but I mean, Rectify is a very interesting show about faith, about, say, Christian faith, but just any sort of spiritual faith. It sort of traverses that world very generously and philosophically. And I would say that in Lonergan's films as well, there's a kind of like, it's sort of like humans trying to find faith in things when God is probably absent. Yeah. There's a real spiritualism in all of them, I think, if not like clear religious inquiry.
Yeah. I want to believe that all of these people are going to find their way out, find their way back to something, out of the clouds that they're under, or out of the misery that they're in.
Yeah. And part of that, I think, Margaret ends on this note of them being out in the world, being surrounded by other people, being with each other, sort of not imprisoning themselves in solitude, which is in Manchester by the Sea. You get the feeling that he makes a kind of soft compromise. Like, he doesn't stay, but he also doesn't quite leave. He creates space for his nephew to be with him.
Yeah, those final shots where it's ambiguous as to how much time has passed as well.
Yes, yeah.
Gives you a sense that maybe not peace, but at least solace. Something is moving forward. He's softened a little bit, even just in allowing the boat to have a second life. Yeah. Because you get the sense that had he not been pushed, had his brother not committed this strangely merciful act within his will, that he would have just stayed in that little apartment in Boston and kept having these sort of menial jobs, and probably would have become more and more alienated from everyone. Mm-hmm. But through a lot of people kind of pulling him back and like even just a little bit of consent on his part, it does sort of end on a more hopeful note. Yeah. It's weird. The more I think about it now, I'm thinking that all three films are about people who have support systems that they don't understand. That's very true. And they also kind of don't want also, or like they resist a little bit. Oh, plenty resistance. Especially in Manchester. I think that's the thing that's sharpening as the film, as his career goes on. Oh, I also think, again, this is me being, but I also feel like with Manchester, it's so much about like masculinity and sort of, again, this is all very speculative on my part, but those men not feeling permitted to accept help from each other. Right. Or even, say, admit that they are in pain. Like, they can express suffering through, like, getting into fistfights or something. Right. But like that, yeah. Anyway, but that's just my... That's an opinion. It's a pretty valid one. Yeah. My thanks to Naomi Skwarna, who you can see in Dim the Fluorescents if you're in Park City tonight, Tuesday, January 24th, at the Slamdance Film Festival. And if you're not there, keep your eye out for it on the film festival circuit, because it's really something. And thanks to Ingrid Hamilton. She knows what she did. You can find Naomi on Twitter at @awomanskwarned, all one word, spelled like it sounds. And you can find Margaret on Blu-ray and DVD from 20th Century Fox Home Entertainment. It's also available on iTunes and Google Play, though I should point out that iTunes has the theatrical cut, while Google Play has the extended version. If you've only seen one of those, see the other one. It's really worth it. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you want to leave a review up on iTunes, that would be very kind of you. Thanks for listening.
Hold it, fellas. I'm afraid you're just too darn loud.